You can add character, detail, and historic charm to your home with the addition of beadboard wainscoting and a chair rail. The project is both fun and rewarding. Here's how. Measure the length and the height of the walls you wish to cover. For this room, we're going to be using a height of 36 inches from the floor to the chair rail. Choose a height that's proportionally scaled to the size of the room or hallway. To cleanly remove the existing molding, first cut the paint along the edge of the molding with a utility knife. This will allow the molding to separate cleanly when pried away, without damaging the paint. Drive a putty knife between the molding and the wall and gently pry the molding away from the wall. Shut off the electricity to the wall switches and outlet that will be covered by the beadboard. Remove the cover plates of all the outlets and switches that are going to be within the area to be covered by beadboard. Even though the circuit breaker for the room has been switched off, it's a safe step to remove the outlet and tape over the connections and then leave it loose so that it can be pulled through the beadboard during the installation. The last step in preparation is to locate the wooden studs behind the wallboard. Once you locate one of the studs with a punch, mark it with a pencil. The next stud will be 16 inches on center away from the first. As you measure, look for drywall screws or use a punch to confirm each of the stud's locations. You will want the edge of each section of beadboard as well as the molding to be nailed to one of these studs. Measure the length of the molding as needed, and cut the molding to length. To make the installation easy, we've cut down the top of ordinary clamshell molding to create a flat 1/4 inch bed upon which to rest the 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard beadboard paneling. When we install the beadboard, it will be measured to sit right on top of this floor molding. This makes the installation much easier. MDF is a stable building material. It will not shrink or crack, and it comes primed, ready to paint. Moving to the end of the molding, set the power miter at a 45-degree angle, and flipping the molding over, make the cut on the end of the molding that will join to the corner. Dry fit the molding in place and check the fit on both ends. Next, check to see that the molding is level. Adjust the height on either end by inserting a wedge until the molding is dead level. Using a common compass and a sharp pencil, set the height of the compass to the excess height of the molding. Note that the molding has already been cut down to provide the 1/4 inch bed upon which the MDF beadboard will rest. Using this distance as an offset, carefully scribe the bottom of the molding, leaving the wedges that were used to level the molding in place. This not only gives you a level base, but it allows you to cut the bottom of the molding to tightly follow the contour of the floor. Cut just outside of the scribed line with a table saw or jigsaw. Note that you follow the line freehand, meaning that you don't use the fence as a guide. Using a hand plane, plane the edge right down to the line, leaving a slight bevel so that the inside edge facing the wall is slightly higher than the outside line. The idea is to have a smooth beveled edge that exactly follows the scribed line. Starting with the corner of the molding, fit the molding in place, and check to see that the molding is level. This is important because the beadboard and the rail cap rest on top of the molding. Note that the end has not been cut yet. Mark the end of the molding and cut the molding just outside of the line. Later we'll trim the cut with a plane to give it a perfect fit. Next, make a new mark for the location of each stud so that you'll be able to see them when the molding's in place. The object is to nail the molding to the studs behind the wallboard and not just into the wallboard. Check the fit of the edges. Trim the edges to fit as needed with a block plane. Apply a small line of glue to the edge of the corner, and starting in the corner, fit the molding into place. Later we'll trim the molding to match. Holding the molding tightly against the floor, fasten the molding to the wall by shooting 2 finish nails into the molding at each stud location. Using a utility knife, carve the corner edges so they match. Later you can sand the edge for a perfect fit. Next, laying the 1/4 inch MDF beadboard backside up, measure the beadboard to 32 1/4 inches high for each section of beadboard needed. Divide the section so that the edge of the beadboard will rest over the stud in the wall. The trick to easily and accurately cutting large sheets of material is to make or buy a jig that, when clamped down right on the marks, guides the blade of the circular saw straight across the material. Clamp the jig firmly in place along the measured line, and resting the saw against the guide, cut the beadboard to size. Always cut with the finished side down, which protects the painted finish from being damaged by the saw. Measure the height for each section you'll need, and cut each panel, laying it aside for later. This makes the sections easier to work with. Dry fit the section in place and mark the edge of each section. Now here's a tip. Paint a 2-inch line of paint on the wall, using the same color that you plan to paint the wainscoting. This will help to hide any tiny cracks or spaces on the edges of the beadboard after it's installed. Lay down a small bead of caulk along the top of the molding. Put a 1-inch dot of wall panel adhesive every 6 to 8 inches along the back of the panel. Gently rest the wainscoting panel on the bed of caulk on the molding, and press the panel tightly against the wall, tacking the panel onto the studs along the edges to hold it firmly in place. Now measure for the next section. The top and the bottom should be the same width if the molding is level. Next, measure for the location of the 4 sides of the electrical outlet, from the edge of the panel and from the top of the molding. Transfer the measurements to the back of the next panel. Set up the guide right along these lines, and cutting just to the outside of the line for final fitting later, cut the next panel. Remember, place the finished side down to prevent the finish from being chipped by the saw. Flipping the panel over, transfer the measurement for the location of the 4 corners of the electrical outlet to the panel, and draw the outline of the box on the beadboard. Using a 1/2-inch spade bit, drill 1 hole in each of the 2 diagonal corners of the outlet location for the jigsaw blade. Then, using a jigsaw, follow the outline, neatly cutting the rectangular hole for the electrical outlet. Check the fit of the panel and the opening for the outlet. Note that, as we did with the molding, the outside edge of the panel was cut to be slightly too wide to allow for final fitting with a hand plane later. Carefully shave and bevel the outer edge of the panel until it fits perfectly. Finishing the fit with a hand plane allows you to adjust for any slight variations along the edge of the joint, which gives you a much tighter fit. Again, apply a thin bead of caulk along the top of the molding, and apply the panel adhesive to the back of the panel. Starting with the edge, position the panel in place, pressing down evenly on the panel to distribute the panel adhesive. Following the line of studs, nail the panel in place, and smooth away any caulk that squeezes out from the bottom of the panel. Now, screw the outlet back into place, and replace the outlet panel. Next, we'll measure for the length of the cap rail, which will be nailed to the top of the length of wainscoting. The cap rail is made up of 1 by 2 inch fur, cut down to 3/4 inches by 1.5 inches. Here's how to do it. First, rip the stock down to 3/4 of an inch. Always use a pusher to guide the stock, and never use your fingers. Next, drop the blade to 1/4 of an inch to make the top cut, and set the fence for a distance of 11/16 from the blade. This takes into account the width of the blade. Make the first cut for the top. Now, reset the blade to 7/8 of an inch to make the other side of the cut, and set the fence for 3/8 of an inch, allowing again for 1/8 of an inch for the blade. Make the second cut along the length of the stock. Using a router with a 3/8 inch round-over bit, round the edge of the cap rail stock to form a rounded edge. The result is a custom cap rail, cut to fit our 1/4 inch MDF beadboard paneling. It's a good idea to sand and prime as many linear feet as you'll need for the project before starting to measure and install the cap rail. Before you cut the cap rail, cut one end square with a power miter saw. Never presume that the end of stock from a lumber yard is square. Next, transfer the measurement for the section of wall to the cap rail stock. One end of our cap rail is going to have what is called a return, which is a clean way of ending a length of molding before it reaches the corner or edge of a wall. To make the return, set the miter for a 45-degree cut, and trim the end of the cap rail with a 45-degree angle cut. Flip the cap rail over and set another opposite 45-degree cut, and cut the end of the stock. Insert the cap rail, and setting the blade for 90 degrees, cut a 1/4 inch long return for the end of the cap rail. Now dry fit the cap rail for a tight fit, checking the return end and the end that will meet the casing. Apply a thin bead of caulk to the inside of the chair rail, and then press the chair rail tightly in place, tacking the rail to the beadboard at the ends and over the studs. Apply a daub of wood glue to the return and press it into place at the end of the chair rail. Apply a fine bead of caulk to the inside edge of the cap rail along the wall, and scrape away the excess with a putty knife. You can wipe away any remaining excess caulk with a damp rag. In the same manner, continue with the other walls, leveling and scribing the bottom molding for a level base, cutting and fitting the MDF beadboard onto the bed of caulk, cutting and fitting the cap rail on a bed of caulk, and caulking and finishing the edges and nail holes, ready for painting. The result is a richly detailed classic finish that adds character and richness to your home.